As presidential candidates argue trade policy, Ford announces a plant for Mexico, and Fiat Chrysler readies more than 1,000 pink slips in Sterling Heights. Meanwhile, Tesla rakes in the orders on its newest offering. Are the rafters shaking in the Motor City? Today is Sunday, April 10th, 2016, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint after a fascinating week for our calling card industry in Detroit. First, we learned that Ford is going to build a new plant in Mexico. Now, when I came to Detroit about 20 years ago, you still heard a lot of bitter fights over driving American cars. Today, you don't hear that as much, in part because it's tougher to define an American car. Is it a Ford built in Mexico, or is it a BMW built in South Carolina? Needless to say, local union leaders would rather those Fords be built here. Then, Fiat Chrysler announced with the phase-out of the Chrysler 200, they're going to be shifting their focus to higher-margin rides like trucks and SUVs, but that means comes July, some 1,300 workers will be laid off from the Sterling Heights plant. Meanwhile, Elon Musk was throwing around his latest card on the auto table, announcing the coming of the Tesla Model 3. And in just 2 days, more than 250,000 buyers put down $1,000 to reserve their $35,000 all-electric California-made ride. That is noteworthy because last year, Tesla sold a total of only about 50,000 cars of all of its models. Where does all of this leave Detroit? In fact, stretch it out to the presidential race. All of these debates about trade and currency manipulation, few cities are as keenly impacted as the home of the big three. And while we're on that subject, this week it was Cruz and Sanders winning in Wisconsin. Does that make any difference in the Trump and Clinton story that we've gotten used to? And it is also time this morning to check back on the progress on Detroit as a future city. A lot to talk about this morning on Flashpoint. All right, let's get started this morning. A little later on, we're going to talk with the new director of Detroit Future City, but we'll start things today with our roundtable. We've got a double hit of the Free Press. Brian Dickerson and Stephen Henderson are here, and a double feature of the Detroit News as well. Daniel Howes and Nolan Finley. Daniel, let me start with you. You wrote a column this past Wednesday that was all right in the sweet spot of what I was starting to see swirling around this week, which was this, we had a lot of news on the auto front, and it didn't take very long for it to become rather politicized and tie right into these arguments over trade policy, over where we're going with currency manipulation. You see a few hyperbolic plays being made
first
here.
off, to have Donald Trump and the president of UAW be outraged that Ford has made this decision is laughable to me. Number one, the president of UAW knew during contract negotiations that this was going to happen. In fact, they essentially traded a deal here, that there was going to be new product coming into the Michigan assembly plant in Wayne as they move these products to Mexico. And Donald Trump, who has a lot of branded products that are built all outside the United States because they're cheaper, knows exactly why Ford is doing what it's doing. And yet he's using it as a club. I mean, this is an old saw, and we live in a globalized world, and we live in a globalized auto industry.
Steve, it's really interesting. We have a Republican candidate arguing against the free trade policies that we have here. In fact, you and I have talked before about this weird intersection of Sanders and Trump supporters. Yeah. This is one of those areas.
This is one
it's
of
fascinating.
those places where they overlap, and they're both arguing pretty protectionist policies as an answer to it. And I mean, I think that's the problem in both of their cases, is they're not wrong for pointing out what's wrong, what's happening. I mean, we need to protect manufacturing jobs in this country. The way to do that, however, is not some of the things that they're talking about, tariffs and other things, punishment. It is dealing with currency manipulation and some of these other things in the trade deals that we have that don't discourage this kind of behavior by people like Ford. But as Daniel points out, this was part of the UAW negotiation. I thought it was the worst part of the deal that they struck, and it points to this continuing problem they have making money off small cars built in this country, and you got to start dealing with that.
But it also speaks to the way these negotiations work, is that the short-term interests of members, voting, dues-paying members, is always going to take precedence over something farther out. Sure. And they had an opportunity to get a very good deal here because of the record profitability of these companies, and they took it. And I don't think it's surprising. What would be surprising is if these companies, instead of taking those products to Mexico, said, hey, we're going to build a new plant. That would be old Detroit. That would be kind of moving forward in a time of real profitability and saying, you know what, we can continue to do this. And the fact they're not doing that, I think, says an awful lot.
Brian, in fact, Daniel also mentioned, I believe the word you used was masquerading, that Donald Trump is masquerading as a Republican candidate. It is interesting where we've arrived.
You can only say we're going to make this country great again with tariffs if you're talking to people who weren't alive for the Depression and forgot all their 8th grade social studies. We've had that argument.
Well, but if he is going to rely, let's say everybody who had watched a job go overseas decided that they were going to vote for Donald Trump, that's a lot of votes.
It is a lot of votes, and he's not talking to the part of voters' brains that analyzes trade policy. He's talking to the part that processes anger and resentment, and those neurons are firing for sure.
There's no doubt about it. Nolan?
Well, you've got 2 candidates out there driving this debate, and Trump and Sanders saying basically the same thing. You would expect that from them. I mean, they're populists. They're, not in this because they're great policy minds. The curious part is nobody seems to be refuting them. None of their opponents. Their opponents seem to be tagging right along with this protectionist spirit. And I don't know if they feel like these two have tapped into something that...
It's kind of dangerous to argue over something that you sense is working.
But what we have to remember about that Mexican plant is these cars are being built not for the U.S. market, not for any real market. They're being built for Washington. If it were up to the automakers, there is no real market for this car, no profitable markets for these cars. People want SUVs and trucks. Washington wants them to build small cars, so they've got to build them as cheaply as possible so they can price them at a point where people will actually buy them.
Because the market's not demanding it.
Well, we also then, with the Tesla news, we're watching a really interesting battle between Detroit now and Silicon Valley.
Fascinating.
Isn't it?
And they'll tell you at GM and Ford particularly it's not a battle. Well, yes, it is. I mean, here you have this Model 3 come out, $35,000, whatever it is, going to do over 200 miles on a charge, and the market, they get over 200,000 orders. General Motors
a few more than we've seen for the Chevy Bolt.
has an electric car. You know how many orders they have? 0. Not a single order. Okay, and that product is going to be out. It's going to be in production at the end of this year. It's going to be in showrooms
we can actually see it at the auto show.
I mean, so on paper, these vehicles are very similar, and they are designed to address the same demand in the marketplace to the extent there is one. But it's one is the Apple iPhone equivalent, and the other is just another car from Detroit.
Two cups and a string. It's interesting, Stephen, because we just came out of what felt like this cycle of just one great piece of news after another for the big three. Huge record years, a very celebratory charity preview night at the auto show, and then this week. Is there something to this, or just a rough week?
Well, you're talking about the competition with Tesla?
All of it.
All of it. Well, I mean, they still have problems. They still have not perfected a lot of the imperfections in their business model, and the small car thing. Nolan points out that it's Washington that wants those cars. Washington wants those cars for pretty good reasons that don't have anything to do with economics. I mean, and that's the government's role, is to try to incentivize us to get cleaner, to get smaller, and you've got to balance that against the consumer market.
Well, there's incentives and there's coercion, and in this case, it's coercion.
It's not coercion. I don't.
Well, and the market's not cooperating. I mean, you've got oil prices down.
Still tough at $2 gas,
and that's not going to change.
Well, it will change. It will change because oil is a finite resource that we can't just get forever.
The point is, it's not going to change in one product cycle.
Right. That's true.
Both the Volt and the Tesla are flying into, the cheapest gas we've seen in 10 years. Imagine if this country had had the foresight to levy a big federal tax on gasoline 2 or 3 years ago, and how different everything, including the auto landscape, would be today. I mean, the cars they're building in Mexico, that's one reason they can't sell them here, because nobody wants.
They got huge gas taxes in Europe, and they're not selling electric vehicles.
That's what we need.
The market's not. I mean, they're dealing with that.
We need to transfer more money to the federal government. That's going to solve our problem.
But again, this is also about a bigger conversation than just who can make money. The government's role here is not just to help the industry make its profits as high as they can be. It's to protect the environment and the people who suffer when the environment's no good.
The government's role is not to manipulate a market and say, here's the products you're going to make, here's the products you're going to buy. That is not the government's role in a free economy.
If it's for something like environmental protection, it absolutely
Steve,
is.
they can always find a common good reason. There's nothing that you can't justify with that mindset. And the government is not a good manager of the economy.
And I'm glad you use that.
Yeah, but the survival of the planet, you'd have to admit, it's a pretty good reason.
And I'm glad you use that phrase.
Where does it end, Brian? I mean, which industry doesn't the government run?
I'll tell you where it ends.
Good.
It ends right here for this segment. Anyway, I got to get to a commercial break. We'll continue. This is a much more interesting conversation on Flashpoint on Local 4. Oh, it was plenty of harmony during that commercial break. Everybody agreed on everything during that. I would like to move back then to where all of this is headed right now on the presidential campaign. Brian, I keep referring to the golden unicorn that all of us reporters want to cover one day, which is a convention that actually has drama, an open, contested convention. Anything happened this week in Wisconsin to change your mind?
We certainly got closer to that. The math is harder for Donald Trump now. I'm very interested to see what will happen in New York and upstate New York, where I grew up. How Clinton and Trump will play, particularly in upstate New York.
Yeah, the conventional notion is that, of course, that this is the home state for those two, and that they should have a walk, and yet Wisconsin complicated that.
Some of the same people, the same politics that allowed Bernie Sanders to surprise everybody in Michigan prevail in upstate New York, certainly.
It's interesting.
And Pennsylvania.
You know, Bernie Sanders has now won 6 of the last 7 Democratic contests, and yet he's not chipping away very much. We have not talked a ton about the superdelegate situation on the Democratic side that may be sucking some drama out of this, where maybe the electorate is telling us there should be.
Well, I mean, they are and they aren't, right? I mean, she's still, well, right before Wisconsin, she still had a 2.4 million vote tally lead, even if you throw the caucuses in. And I know some people have been arguing about, well, if you take the caucuses out, if you put it all together, she's still ahead by that many votes. And so the superdelegates are likely to stay largely in her corner. If he can start to win some bigger states, right? If he wins New York, if he wins Pennsylvania, if he goes out west and wins California, now you're talking about a popular vote that's closer, and he can make a stronger argument about for what these superdelegates should be doing.
What's your thought on where we are?
Well, I think if you're looking at this race, if you're looking at it from a Republican perspective and watching the Democratic race and seeing that she has this string of defeats, Bernie Sanders has this string of victories in a variety of different states. I mean, 7 of the last 8. Wisconsin is not a small state, and it is sort of the cradle of Democratic progressivism. And Wisconsin went for Sanders. If you're sitting there as a Republican looking at this, you're thinking, wow, she is very vulnerable. Young voters don't like her. She's losing with white voters, and he's even leading her with women voters. And you're looking at that from a Republican perspective, saying she can be beat in November, but she can't be beat by Donald Trump, and she can't be beat by Ted Cruz. And you know, the Republicans got to be sitting. The Republicans got to be sitting here thinking about the convention and the opportunity here to right this race and decide whether they actually want to win in November.
To right this race.
Well, what would you do? How would
right
you do that?
as in R.
It's going to be a contested.
Yes.
It's going to be a contested convention, and once you get to that point, the game starts over.
So you would support a solution that gives somebody who had a minority of the votes the nomination?
Well,
or somebody who has none, a fresh face.
If you get to the later ballots, you can do that.
You can, but should you is the question.
Well,
if you're looking at somebody who's 2/3 of the Republicans oppose Donald Trump.
Except that they got the most votes.
Their job in Cleveland as a political party is to come up with a candidate who can win in November and represent the values of the party. That is not either Trump or Cruz. You look at the polling. Interesting. I looked at a poll from Pennsylvania this week. Kasich was running 3rd among the Republicans, but when matched up against Clinton and Sanders, he's the only one of the 3 who wins.
That's what he keeps telling me.
What's your goal here?
Doesn't seem to matter.
Who can say what the values of the Republican Party are at this point? What are those values?
Well, I think the values of the party have been pretty consistent. I don't think
and
Trump
they've
Trump
lost
has
in
never
every election.
Trump has never been
this season.
They're losing.
Trump and Cruz are fighting out this battle, and the traditional Republicans are certainly not. But you got 25–30% of the primary vote so far is coming from non-Republicans.
The fear here, though, Daniel, is a legitimate one among the Republican leadership, that if you start pulling any levers, that third that right now is strongly with Donald Trump, you lose them no matter what you do, and you blow a hole through the party that they don't recover from for many cycles.
Yeah, and I think that's why Wisconsin was so important. I mean, they don't want to pull the levers. They want to get this thing into multiple ballots, and if they can say, look, these are the rules. And you don't. Well, I'm saying, if it says you got to get.
You've got a lot of political newcomers to the process that are there because
that.
of Donald Trump. I'm not sure they're interested in the explanation.
So
on the rules.
what's the party supposed to do? Say, well, you got 1150, so okay, we'll give it to you.
I mean, it's 1237.
It's 1237. It's the number.
And listen, I mean, he knew that when he started.
I don't know that he did. He didn't seem to have any clue about how this convention worked.
You're going to lose a third of Republican voters anyway if they nominate him. If you lose a third on one end or the other, what difference does it make? Better to lose and not destroy the party.
I think if you pull something like that in this political season with tempers and people's interest as high as it is, I think you will see Cleveland 16 look like Chicago 68.
So how much different is it if you get to Philadelphia and the superdelegates decide the race?
I was just about to ask that of you, Brian.
Why?
Because it reflects
the
the
same
popular
danger
vote.
there for the Democrats? Because
What do you mean it doesn't?
Because the 2 million votes that you referred to earlier, that is not reflected in the delegate difference. The delegate difference has her is why. No, she's much further ahead than. Oh, am I out of time already? Really? Brian, I'll let you have the last word. Sorry.
I don't think the schism in the Democratic Party is anything like the schism in the Republican Party. Bernie Sanders has given no indication that he's going to bail on Hillary Clinton if she's the nominee.
We got to leave it there. I know if we had 5 more minutes, we'd solve it all and settle it. We'll come back. We'll talk about Detroit Future City. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Right, welcome back. In 2012, this hefty document was released, a strategic plan for Detroit called Detroit Future City. And I promised then that we would update it frequently. Let's check in this morning with the new executive director of Detroit Future City, Anika Goss-Foster. Anika, thank you very much for coming this morning. There's so many. We would never be able to get through to all the updates on this. Really was an amazing drill down. I remember when it first came out, and I've kept it very close at hand in my office since then. But give me a progress report in these almost 4 years now. Where do you feel like that effort to think about Detroit as it's in a city of the future, where are we?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that have happened that and coming in very early, so this is my 3rd month.
Right. Congratulations,
thank
by the way.
you. I think where we're headed, we've just became a 501c3, the Detroit Future City. And I think what that does for us is to be able to have different conversations, right? Where we can talk about philanthropy in a much more strategic investment kind of conversation. We can advocate and represent the community with the community different, I think, and we can have a much more honest and engaging conversation with the city. So that's one thing that's happened. We've been able to partner with a couple of nonprofits like Black Family Development, for example, and producing our field guide for vacant lots.
Right.
And moving that forward has really been a wonderful process where that process, the field guide, actually we trained residents, block clubs, community partners on design on designs for actually vacant lots in their neighborhoods.
Because you've got a lot of well-intentioned people that see the problem, but trying to figure it out is like picking up a porcupine. In fact, John Gallagher last week in the Free Press, a week ago today, wrote a great piece about how for all of the effort and for all the well-minded people trying to make things happen, you still have these regulatory nightmares in place that obstruct progress.
It's tough. And I think part of that is what I will say about that, especially sort of understanding how the city works, is that it's not an easy feat right? I'm going to give a lot of credit to the Duggan administration because they are trying to build their own internal capacity and move things around after the restructure to try to advance some of that red tape.
To kind of build bridges over it instead of working through it.
Exactly, to try to move that and try to encourage residents and block clubs and neighborhood associations to engage, small businesses. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight, right?
One of the fears I know that people like Dan Kincaid and a lot of people who helped put it was this creating a city that was a bunch of islands that weren't really connected. And I wonder, when you hear people with this ongoing debate about the two Detroits or the several Detroits, do you feel like are we in a healthy place right now?
I think that we are at an interesting crossroads. I think that there's two paths. Yes, that we could end up with two very clearly defined Detroits. That one that is African American and very poor and does not have access to a lot of resources, and one that is very rich and white and probably young. Or we can actually plan well, right? And we can be inclusive and intentional about how we make investments, how we create access to those investments, how we create access to planning and conversations so that we can continue to build a city that's for everybody, no matter how long you've been here, whether you're new or whether you've been, a fourth or fifth generation.
The first place you described doesn't sound like a city of the future.
No, it's not. But you can end up there very quickly.
When you watch some big things that are happening right now, we've got this hockey arena that's taking place right in front of our eyes, the M1 line, the Q line coming along. What excites you most as you look around? Or is it that stuff, or is it the stuff that's happening in neighborhoods?
I think, I think all of it is very exciting, right? And because you need all of it, because it's all of that that's going to make the city great. It's not going to be one thing or the other. I think people are asking really hard questions, and I think we should continue to be challenged by those hard questions. Who wins from the hockey arena and with the M1 line? Is it for everyone? Are there people who can actually use it? And as long as we continue to ask these questions and hold people accountable for the answers, and people are feeling like they're included in the process moving forward, then the city will continue to be great for everyone, because you are going to need these major economic development investments in order to make the city great.
No doubt about it. Anika, thanks very much for the update.
Thank you for having me.
We will continue to check in on the progress of the report card. This is a remarkable document.
Okay,
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here as well. Meet the Press is coming up next. I hope you have a great week, and I hope to see you back here next week for Flashpoint.